And Labor frontbencher Ed Husic. Ed Husic, first to you. Is the Treasurer not simply stating the obvious in the city that you and Mr Laundy know very well?
Yeah, he talks about getting a good job in a time when unemployment's higher than what it was under the GFC, and he talks about getting good wages at a time when wages growth is at its lowest that it's been since records began by the RBA. And for a lot of people that are trying to get into the market, it would be cold comfort to get that cheap advice from the Treasurer. The other thing is too that we're seeing some incredible stats coming out. Yesterday, the investor share of new lending up to just a shade under 52%. Clearance rates the weekend before last at about 90% in Sydney, and investor lending growing at double the rate roughly of owner-occupier. And we're seeing very little action to try and calm things down, the frenzy that's out there, with the regulator saying that if they do anything, they'll do it behind closed doors. I think there needs to be a dose of realism. There needs to be something serious that is done about it, but you worry whether or not that's going to happen when you hear the kind of comments that you got yesterday.
Craig Laundy, for a Treasurer with very little political capital in the first place, could his language have been a bit tighter here?
Look, Kieran, I get that journalists want to pick a sentence out of a paragraph or a whole press conference and go for that 7-second grab. But when you look at the sentence that was used in the context it was used in, you see that he was actually referring to cost of funds being at all-time lows, and the fact that that is something that is also driving housing demand. But the reality of what Ed has just said to you, and Miss Goldie has got it right in her intro, this is a supply-side issue more than it is a demand-side issue. We have a federation review and a tax review going on at the moment, and we'll come to white paper stage at the end of the year. That is the side that we need to work out. It is the supply side, because everything that's being discussed at the moment is missing the point. 2,500 in Ed and my state, 2,500 blocks of land were released last year by the state government for sale. Last Saturday in Sydney, 800 auctions went on. If you assume, and it's a safe assumption conservatively, that there were 3 or 4 people that wanted those 800 properties, that's 2,500 to 3,000 people last Saturday looking to buy a home in a market in which the state government, who owns the land, released 2,500 in a year. It's quite clearly not sustainable, and these are the issues we need to discuss.
But the issue
well,
too is,
Ed Husic, do we need more nuance in this debate? And as Craig Laundy points out, essentially cut the Treasurer some slack for those comments, given the broader context in which he made them.
well, Joe Hockey, I mean, is the gift that keeps on giving. For those people that are struggling for a Christmas gift this year, they can't go past the Joe Hockey gaff maker. I mean, if you reckon a Thermomix creates a mess, wait until you see what the Joe Hockey gaff maker does to the minds of a coalition backbencher. He keeps making these comments, and there's a pattern there of whenever he's in a fix, he makes these type of remarks, and it does take away from the serious issues that need to be discussed, like, for example, what Craig just mentioned in terms of housing supply. Yes, housing supply is one element of it, but as the Reserve Bank rightly notes too, on the issue of affordability, you need to have infrastructure to take people to jobs close to where they are. If the Abbott government's abandoned cities policy and won't support public transport infrastructure or other infrastructure that gets cities moving, what do you think is going to happen to affordability? I don't have a problem with us looking at these issues, but what we're hearing continually is review after review after review. And guess what? Joe Hockey just referred another housing affordability review to the committee I sit on, Economics, after the Senate brought down one just a few months ago that's this thick. When are we going to see action? We can't have a review-led recovery. We need to see some results.
Yeah, now, and Craig Laundy, back to you in relation to the way these comments are taken. I guess the question is, was Joe Hockey just being too flippant on something where he should have more sensitivity for the hundreds of thousands struggling, particularly in Sydney and parts of Melbourne, to to even get as a realistic proposition that they can buy a house. And the second thing is as well, I guess, when asked about is the market unaffordable, he says, well, the houses are still being sold. But if you look at the house in Ed Husic's electorate, Blacktown, it went for more than $1 million. Yeah. It wasn't a local that bought it.
Yeah, Kieran, look, obviously there's two parts to what you've just put to me. The first part is, I go back to what I said at the opening. If you look at what he said, a sentence has been picked out, a 7-second grab. The typical, and I get journalists are all into the gotcha moments, but if you look at what he was saying,
but two grabs,
two grabs, mate. But if you look at, he was there to announce a massive beefing up of the demand on our side. The one thing we can control is foreign investment. He was there to make that announcement as part of an overarching theme, and that just gets completely missed by the journalists, and they focus on one sentence. When you look at it in its entirety, it wasn't a gaffe, mate. He was stating, a fact. How bank credit actually unfolds. You try and get a housing loan, Kieran, where you don't fill in what you earn. You're not going to get one. That's the reality of what he was saying. And the cost of funds following on from that are at all-time historic lows, and that is also adding to demand.
So can I
this is, and the second thing, Kieran, in terms of the more nuanced, go back to the opening comment to Ed. Yes, it is a more nuanced. I'm with Ed. I get frustrated with the time things take. Not coming from a political background, but the process is in train and it needs to be full and frank and fair income later in the year.
So, Kieran, can I just pick up on a point?
Ed, you wanted to reply there? Yeah, sure.
There was an element of what Craig just mentioned then in terms of the way in which borrowers will apply for loans and whether or not that's fair income. And on the investment side, I mentioned earlier, the growth in investment loans nearly double that of owner-occupiers. The regulator themselves has tested some of the points that Craig's raised, and some banks are ignoring the actual living expenses of borrowers who are investors, or understating the borrowing that the borrower themselves put in, and basically handing over, in some cases, 50% more in loan amounts compared to other conservative lenders. So there's this behaviour that's occurring in the market that really needs to be clamped down on. What we had in terms of foreign investment, the reason why the coalition's agitated about that is because it's affecting the high end of the market. For the other parts of Sydney, like you mentioned in terms of Blacktown or in Mount Druitt, where I've got investors competing with each other and squeezing out low and middle income earners, we don't see any action on that. We don't see the government getting the regulator out there to say some of the crazy lending should be reined in, and they won't invest in the things that make life easier out in the suburbs that will help affordability. So there is a great deal of frustration about what's going on. And, and like I said, if Joe Hockey's got a tin ear, I wouldn't be defending that tin ear on here. I'd be saying to him, get a dose of reality and get some action happening.
We've got to take a quick break. Back with Ed Husic and Craig Laundy in just a moment.